are fast coming to the end of year one. Can you believe that? We've been doing this for a whole year. And it will be that we will move into the second year starting next week. We plan to cover the entire Bible in 3 years. So this is where we are today. Today we're going to talk about the sin of Achin and the defeat of Ai. I don't know what else to call it. How would you pronounce Ai? Ai. I'm just going to pronounce it that way, Ai. I'm not quite sure what it would have been in their language. We're studying Joshua, Judges, and Ruth, and today we're going to talk about the sin of Achin. You know, there were 2 campaigns in conquering Canaan, right? They didn't conquer the whole land all at once. They had 2 separate campaigns, the north and the south. And you can see the effort required. To capture the south covered a lot of territory in the Bible, but the north, not quite so much. There were just fewer villages, fewer towns. It was more desolate an area, more mountainous an area than in the south, in the plains. So it took quite a bit of time. Look at all of the things that occurred, though, to conquer in the southern campaign. Quite a few events. From Edom to Nebo. Eventually they come up to Gilgal, then down to Jericho. From Gilgal they go to Ai, where we're going to talk about today. And then all these other towns and cities there. Eventually, though, they've conquered everything. And the land that God promised them is finally theirs. But they still have to go up north and conquer all of those nations and those cities that were up there. But the northern campaign, a small effort compared to the southern campaign. How many times in your lives have you heard this? The thrill of victory. And what about defeat? The agony of defeat. I think they don't use that today, but boy, it's just ingrained in me to think about the thrill of victory. How many times have you heard Jim McKay say that on ABC? Well, it could be said, the same thing could be said of the Jews and their effort. By the way, did you ever wonder who the agony of defeat was? The thrill of victory, the agony of defeat. There really was a skier who actually came down that slope, and his ending wasn't quite what he hoped for, was it? I mean, and they used that every Sunday. You would see the agony of defeat. Ever since I was a kid, I watched it, and I saw Olympic skiing on ABC's Wide World of Sports, and the guy's name was Vinko Bogataj, and he is of Yugoslavia. Now, how embarrassing would it be for all of your life to be known as the agony of defeat? Well, that was probably about to be true of the Israelites. They were tumbling down a mountain and they didn't even realize it. So today's lesson is really about that agony of defeat. The thrill of victory for them would have been Jericho, right? They just marched in, God did the work, the walls fell down, and the city was theirs. They didn't have to do a lot. Was it that way with all of the other places they went? I think they thought it was going to be that way at Ai, and that got them in trouble. There, they experienced very early in their campaign the agony of defeat. I mean, think about it. Jericho was a huge city with tremendous walls all the way around it. People lived in and on those walls. People lived in this huge city that was there, and the city was theirs. The agony of defeat for them was about to happen, though, and they didn't know it. They were about to go into a very tiny little province, a very tiny little area, Ai, a whole lot smaller than Jericho. It did have walls around it, though, but surely they looked at those and laughed, thinking about those walls that they saw at Jericho. It should have required only 3,000 men. How many did it require at the end? 10 times that amount of soldiers. So they could have conquered it and had the thrill of victory, but instead they suffered the agony of defeat. You probably don't have your Bibles open and probably couldn't turn there fast enough, but Jenny, turn to Joshua chapter 7. That's in the Old Testament, baby. I don't know. I didn't memorize the pages. I got the rest of it memorized, but not the pages. Joshua chapter 7, what's the first word? I'll give you a clue while she's looking it up. It's not a sesquipedalian, loquacious word. I had to practice that word several times this morning, sesquipedalian. Sesquipedalian is a word that simply means it's not a 1.5 foot long word, meaning not a very long word. It's a very short word instead. It's only 3 letters, and I have vamped as long as I can, baby. We're on hold till you find it here. Okay. Joshua 7, chapter 7, verse 1. Can you guess what this 3-letter word's going to be? We just saw the agony of defeat. Now, what's the word? Just the first word. But. A 3-letter word, but. That whole chapter starts with the word but. What preceded it was the victory that they saw. And it should have been that easy for them, but it wasn't. It got hard. It got very hard in their second attempt. The first conquest was a resounding success. God told them in Joshua 6, chapter 17 through 18, before you go in that city, I want you to know you're going to be tempted. Do not be tempted. Everything that's in that city that is important, and gold and all the silver and everything, all of that is devoted to me. Only Rahab the prostitute and all who are with her in her house will be spared, because she hid the spies we sent. But keep away from the devoted things, so you will not bring your own destruction by taking them. Otherwise, you'll make the camp of Israel liable for destruction and bring trouble on it. Did they heed his words? No. Joshua made it clear, hands off. But the people didn't heed his words. Your children, if you think about it, when they were growing up, you tell them, you can't touch that. And the next thing you know, they've eaten half of it. And we're guilty of it just as adults are guilty, children were. We're just as guilty as they are. Sometimes about taking devoted things. The things that are devoted to God, we take them. How do we do that? I'll just focus on the government and how we do that with the government. Did you know that recent statistics tell us that the United States loses $207 billion each year in taxes? $207 billion are lost in tax revenue by people who underreport earned income. You can make some good money if you want to by turning in some people who do that, by the way. Last year, the government paid out $5 million for truth tellers who told on people for cheating on their taxes. Almost 80% of the people in the U.S., when they're asked about it, think it's wrong to cheat on taxes. But we do that. So we come to the story of Achin. Achin had a sin. What was that sin? Was it that we know that he was a head of a family of Israel, of the tribe of Judah. But his sin was that even though he was told not to take any of these items, don't take the gold, don't take the household articles, the gods and the idols that you see, don't take their livestock, and don't take their slaves. You can't take any of those things. What did Achin take? Pardon? Oops. A what? A garment. I can't read lips sometimes, I'm sorry, especially when you have a mask on. But beyond that, he did take a garment, but he also took something else. He took some gold. He took some precious things that he thought with him. He took gold and silver, but like you said, that's not all he took. He took a garment, right? I'm going to give you a microphone next Sunday. How about that? Achin took 200 shekels of silver, 50 shekel gold bar, about 2,500 plus another 1,000, 3,000, almost $4,000 he got away with in today's money. But he saw a beautiful Babylonian robe. Now that today would have been priceless. If you had an actual Babylonian robe, you couldn't put a price on what that would have run. And for him, there was a different reason why it was precious. Babylon was the greatest city in the world, right? It was the center of everything cultural and refinement. Achin wanted to be chic. He wanted to be stylish. He wanted to be trendy. Someone who was in the in crowd. Can't you see him walking down the street in that robe? Can you imagine? Can you imagine all the eyes that would be on him? Who wouldn't turn ahead, right? So let's focus now, get our focus off of what went wrong at the very beginning of this with one man who was selfish, who did what God told him not to do, and let's focus on the battle. Was this battle that they were about to do an easy one with Ai, or was it hard like the last battle was? Were they very successful? You think they would have been successful on their first battle, but God proved them wrong there because they didn't do what he wanted them to do. How about the second one? Was it an easy one or was it a hard one? Joshua sent some scouts out. He returned and they reported, we only need 3,000 soldiers. We only need 3,000. We can take that city easy. 3,000 soldiers then were collected and sent in. But their first battle was not a success. 3,000 soldiers simply wasn't enough. They lost 36 men right away. After this, the Bible says the Israelites' hearts melted with fear. Hearts melted with fear because, again, they thought God was going to be with them, and apparently God wasn't with them, right? Joshua came back, and even he was asking God the wrong question. He fell face down in front of the ark. All of the elders did too. They covered their head with ashes. They laid down in front of the ark to prove to God how prostrate they were. Prostrate, not prostate. How prostrate they were. And Joshua asks, why did you send us here knowing that we would be defeated? Have you ever asked God that question? God, why did you want me to do that when you knew I wasn't going to be successful? We could have been content if we'd stayed on the east of Jordan, but you wanted us to go up and come over to the west and conquer. The Canaanites are going to hear about this. We're going to be wiped out, God. The problem is, even though it's what we might do today, they were simply asking God the wrong question. God knew what their question and Joshua's question should have been. And it was not, why did you let us be defeated? What should it have been? Any ideas on a better question for Joshua to have asked God? Why what? Why were we defeated? Okay, that's getting at it. What he should have asked God is, what did we do wrong? He should have accepted guilt for the fact that it wasn't conquered and have God explain why why they were in the position they were in. God chose not to answer his question, why did you let us down? He ignored their question. Instead, God answered the question that should have been asked, what did we do wrong, God? And God would have quickly told him, think about it. You don't have to think hard. You would see what you did wrong. How did we get in the way, God? How did we cause ourselves to lose that battle? God told him, all of you have sinned when you violated my covenant. I told you not to steal, but you all stole. I told you, I gave you a simple question and you lied. Here's what you did, even though you must not even realize it today. You took possessions that were hands off, and that's why you were routed. Go through the camp, find everything you can find that you took, and completely destroy it. I don't want it anymore. Don't give it back to me. I won't take it. You need to go and destroy everything. It's not pleasing to me because you lied about it. So everyone was looking to see who it was that stole, because it was a surprise to some that somebody had stolen some of these priceless things. A scheme was put in place to find who it was. They thought God had called each of the leaders at each level one at a time to come forth. And they would ask, who was it? God would tell them. So the first group came up. All of the Judah clans stayed, and everyone else took a step back. And then they found out which clan it was. Eventually they found out it was the tribe of Judah. That was the tribe who had stolen. Zimri's people. Then all the sons of Zimri came out, and Carmi was called. Carmi was Zimri's father. Can you imagine the fear and anxiety that Achin was feeling at this point? One by one, his family and his ancestors and all the people above him were being called. He knew that his name was going to be called. He couldn't hide it. God knew what he had done. And eventually it was time for Achin to take his place. He was going to be found out. Isn't that a tremendous fear all of us have? We live our lives a certain way. We want people to see us, right? And we're so afraid somebody's going to see through all of that and really know who we are and what we're like. We are just like him in some ways. Everybody was going to know that Achin was the culprit, and eventually they found out. He knew all along it was him. Everybody else was looking for, but he didn't have the courage to admit it. Now, this is a lesson, folks. If you haven't taught your children or grandchildren, it's a good lesson to go over with them because they need to know how hard it is sometimes to tell the truth, but it's very important that you be truthful. Especially if what you have to be true about is going to cost you in things like power, prestige, money, even a spanking. But God expects you always to be truthful, and Achin paid the ultimate price for it. Achin nervously stepped forward, of course, roll call, and he said, "Yeah, it was me. I took those articles. I hid them under the ground in my tent because I didn't want anybody to see them." And that's often the way it is when you steal, isn't it? You may have something, but you can't put it on public display. People will see it. People will know it. People will wonder where you got it. And eventually, they might find out that you actually stole it. I took the articles. I hid them under the ground. I can give them back if you'll just follow me. And he showed the people where he put them. They were buried in the floor of his tent, just like he said. Was that a good place to put it? I think I could have found somewhere a little bit further away, perhaps. Instead of only gold and silver in the robe, you would think that would be punishment enough to take all of his pretty things away. Everything that Achin owned, including himself, his entire family, and everything they owned were taken out. The people stood around and pelted them with rocks until everyone in the family and all of his livestock and even the gold, the silver, and even the robe was stoned. Then everything was covered over with a huge pile of rocks. Now, if you're like me, you're probably asking yourself, why would God want him to do something like that? Wasn't he a loving God? And yet he wants him to do some public thing like this. Sounds like something we might occur even today over in the ancient East, right? Anyone care to tell us why God would do that? Why did he do this with Achin? Well, none of you have an answer. At least I'll take a stab at it. I'll give you my thought about it. Simply because God hates evil. He hates sin. He hates the sin that's in our lives just as bad as he hates what Achin did. He wants us to stone that sin, if you will. Get it away, get it out of our hearts. So the people realized that a do-over was needed, right? They failed the first attempt. God wanted them to take it. They still got to take that city. This time, instead of taking 3,000, they took 10 times that number. They took 30,000 men to a hill above Ai. And the army then began beating on their shields and waving their swords and things, and they were taunting the people inside the city. Now, the people of Ai weren't only angry, but they were brazen. And when they saw the Israelites out there on the hill waving at them and shouting at them, they opened the gate, and all the people fled out. And that gave them the end that they needed to get inside those walls and kill all of the people and take what God wanted them to take. The army was instructed, though, when they started running toward them, to fall back. And the army did. It receded for a little bit. At this point, more and more of the fighting men of the city came out after them. And at some point, the Jewish fighters were instructed then to turn back toward them, and they fell on the soldiers who were now unprotected from the walls. The city was completely routed. This would have been a far easier way for them to do it. And God intended for them to do it this way all along, I think. But a little bit of that, the sin problem kind of came in first. Now, this is a picture of what Joshua did. Okay? Get this picture in your mind. You have a little town of Ai here. You have a bigger town of Jericho down to the south. And all the people of Israel were up around Ai. 20,000 soldiers of Israel came out to fight from Gilgal. 20,000 Israel soldiers came from Gilgal over as if they were ready to go fight Ai. Meanwhile, 5,000 soldiers went all the way down south around Jericho, and they came up on the other side of the city. All of this was unannounced. They snuck up there, if you will. Ai foolishly sent their forces out to meet the Israelites, who they thought were coming up in great mass. They didn't stay inside their fortress. They fled. And while they were out, the 5,000 soldiers in the rear entered Ai and killed everybody inside, while the people were still outside, shaking their swords and chasing after the other Israelites. Now, if you look at that, and you like sports, you might think of, where in the world have I seen this play before? Where did we get this play, if you will? We see it on the football field sometimes. I know I've seen it on the football field, and so we can put it in easy to follow football terms. Here's what it looks like. It's called the end around. The end around usually comes toward, well, I won't say that, but the end around happens frequently in football games. This is an offensive end around play. Every player who is allowed to move, some players can't move, they have to stay in place, but the ones that are allowed to move do actually move, and they start pushing against the people. There's only one person, though, who is free to run. That's that wide end on the right down. He's free to run back behind while these other people are pushing hard and making it seem like the fight is right at the line of scrimmage. This guy runs around, comes up on the other side, comes in, and does help conquer what's going on over there. The linesmen push him to the left. The wide end runs back behind the quarterback. The ball is handed to him. The guy runs up, headed to the right, going around all the mess that's happening near the center of their group, and sneaks his way into the end zone. Pretty sneaky, right? This is the play that was done that day in Ai. It was an end around. Ai never saw it coming. You never thought I could put football and church together, did you, huh? The end around part's the name of the play, meaning that the end runs around and catches everybody off guard. And that's what the Jews did. They had an end around play. Well, enough about how it was conquered. We need to ask ourselves, do we even know where Ai is today? And there's some confusion about where the city of Ai is. For years, since 1928, it was thought to be up near Bethel and Beth Aven. You see those little red dots in the upper left-hand corner? Near Bethel and Beth Aven. They thought Et Tel was the name we know today was the city of Ai. For a long time they thought that. But recent findings in architecture of the cities that were there, especially about Ai, some diggings that they have found recently, tell us that even though people think that it was there, that there were no one living there at that time. How could that possibly be Ai? Well, is the Bible incorrect, or is the science incorrect here about where the people were? Well, you would say the Bible is incorrect if you listen to what they tell you. If the name of Ai was an early reference to any of these four cities up there, we know them as Baton, Beth Aven, Kerbet Machtir, and Et Tel. But there are problems with that assumption. If you look at what we know about the city of Ai from our current explorations, you can see that it could not possibly be any of those four cities. there were things that were not at Et Tel that should have been found in the city of Ai. Some of the features have not been seen in any ruins uncovered up there. Now, some people look at this and ask the wrong question. Well, in that case then, there was no Ai. Well, just because you haven't discovered something doesn't make it true, does it? It's going to be laying out there for a long time. Penicillin was available, but we hadn't learned to use it yet. The same thing is true about this. It wasn't that there was no city called Ai. People would, though, say it's just a story in the Bible. It's one of those stories that's not true. So if you ever run into anybody who asks you, be sure to tell them that Ai is not Et Tel, okay? Some believe it is possibly the city known as Khirbet el Maktir, but again, it couldn't be Khirbet el Maktir for the same reason. The ruins just do not contain some significant features that were required for any of the city that you're looking at to be described as being Ai. So we just don't know. We really don't know where it was. Shechem is halfway between the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea, just under just to the north of the Judean province. It's a city in the middle of two hills, Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim, just to the north of Jerusalem. So why are we talking about Shechem? We need to look at some events that are going to happen in Jews' history at Shechem. Shechem was a very important place. Abraham was there when God promised him, all of this land that you see is yours. This is your land. Jacob lived in Shechem. Jacob's sons were needed to be found one day, and they found them in a city very nearby these four cities. It's here that Jacob is buried. It eventually became a Levitical city of refuge. And after the success over the warriors of Ai, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, God confirmed the terms of his covenant here at Shechem. And that's why we're talking about it, because after Ai, he goes to Shechem and confirms the covenant. Later, and much later, Rehoboam was rejected by the tribes as their king here. So Shechem is a very important city early in their lives. So remember Moses' shouting match? One half went to one side of the mountain and the other half went to the other side of the mountain. That happened very near Ai. It happened in Shechem. Now, I got to tell you, there are people who are scientists in the study of sound. I've forgotten what they're called. Maybe some of you know what you would call a scientist who studies sound. No? Okay. Trust me, there's a word for people who study sound. Moses must have had a degree in sound engineering, if you will, because God told him to erect an altar of stones and build an altar upon them and then go shout blessings. Well, Moses knew exactly what to do. He sent half the people up one side of that mountain that we saw earlier, those two mountains. He sent half of the people up one side. He sent the other half of the people up the other side. And there, one side shouted blessings, the other side shouted back curses. This is what's going to happen to us if we're faithful and if we're not faithful. The people should have gotten the message, but did they? Unfortunately, no. Now, it's interesting, the locale of the two hills scientifically support the idea of a shouting match. Scientifically, it makes a lot of sense. What we read in the Bible occurred exactly as the Bible said it did. Gerizim, the mountain called Gerizim over on you're looking at it, would be on the left-hand side there, is certainly more blessed in produce than Mount Ebal, which is basically dry and barren. And even that was true in Moses' time. It's even true today. One side is blessed and the other side seems to be cursed. Maybe this was an excellent place for them to be shouting blessings and curses back at each other, because you could look at those two hills and realize one had been blessed, the other had not. But Moses must have had a PhD in the science of acoustics. That's the study that I was asking for earlier. Acoustics. Moses knew how to use them. He put Joshua and the priests in the ark down in the middle. He sent one half of the tribes up on a hill and the other half on the opposite hill, and there they had a shouting match back and forth. The area is not just hilly, but where you walk up it, it's convex. It's shaped like a bowl. And so you're walking up as you went up, but you were inside a bowl. So the same thing, very interesting thing, happens even today in this populated area. If you read about it, you'll find that people on one side hear somebody outside all the time, thinking that was somebody outside their door when it was a noise coming from way over on the other side of the valley. The houses and buildings now make it not quite so easily to be heard, but still it happens. So remember our football analogy earlier? Does this part of the story of Moses and the capture of Ai look somewhat like a famous pastime of ours where the enemy combatants come and fight in front of two camps, each supporting one team or the other? Looks a bit like football. It was appropriate then that the game-winning play late in the last quarter was an end around. It looks a lot like football. Well, that's all I have for you today. Next week we're going to pick up. We've got quite a few more lessons to go before we come to the end of the book of Revelation. But eventually, I promise, and Lord willing, we will get there. Thank you.